Coming up, we take a look back at Daniel Jones' performance on Sunday as the Giants got a victory, but was it play calling or decision making that led to his success? Also, Toney, Jefferson, and Landon Collins came up as key contributors. How can that unfold going forward as more reinforcements lay just around the corner? Ah, yes, friends, it's OGP, the one giant bastard. Ah, yes, friends, it's OGP, the one giant podcast, where, of course, we are your host over here, Adam Armbrecht, over there, Andy Makowitz. No real time for pleasantries, Andy, because just one day removed from a great victory, we have more to break down from that Giants win.
Oh, do we ever, Adam? I mean, I'm still buzzing from that victory.
Yep.
You saw some of the videos from the Giants locker room. Isaiah Hodgins came out with a video. Sterling Shepard still in the middle, mixing it up. Doesn't it feel like it kind of feels like he's going to be a Giant for life, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Like every time you see these videos, right?
And when you're watching the celebration videos from the locker room, yes, that is Sterling Shepard with his shirt off as if he had just come off the field and was getting out of his gear. Like it's not even just that he was there. It's that he looked like he must have just played 80% of the offensive snaps, had a couple of key catches, and then was in there ready to celebrate.
I wish all I needed was him just to have eye black on. Like right underneath, and it would have just been
under the eyes.
Chef's kiss, being like, I'm in there in the trenches. But listen, it goes to show how important he really is to this team. Like he came back on a restructured deal, obviously got injured again. There's been a lot of talk, especially with beat writers in the building, that are like, don't be surprised if the Giants bring him back again next season, because you could tell whatever it is, he is part of whatever they are building right now.
Yeah, well, I think you and I have talked about it a little bit on the podcast, and we won't belabor this. And I've talked about it with Mike the other day when we were watching the game together about, the scenarios in the offseason, the Darius Slaytons, Isaiah Hodgins, the price points, etc. Like at some point, the cost of keeping Sterling Shepard around with the injuries that he's had can probably be very much worth it for the value he brings to the locker room, right? So it's like all of those things I think can merge together to end up being like Sterling Shepard. Hopefully, if he returns, great player. If not, electric team mascot. I think we got a real second life for him. The other thing then, though, was, so it was at the top there. We're going to talk about Daniel Jones. Going to talk about some standout players. Landon Collins makes his first appearance really for the Giants here in a significant way in that Washington game. And then there is a real scenario where the Giants can clinch the playoffs this weekend coming up here. But on Daniel Jones, I mean, I thought it was hilarious because we have our discussion yesterday. We don't talk too much about Jones because it's just not where we thought the focus of the episode should be, right? In the comments, man, it's as good as it's ever been, because you have 50% of the people who are, why are you even bothering putting any respect on this guy's name? He's not the future quarterback. It's a disaster. And then you got people who are saying, what's your problem? Why are you acting like Daniel Jones didn't do more in this game? You guys just don't respect Daniel Jones. And that was off of an episode where we didn't even really talk about him. Like we didn't even put any fodder out there for the fan base to get excited about. I appreciate both sides of it. And I think just in this game, I think there's reasons why you still remain so divided in your opinion, overall, the fan base, because this game gave you the sample size, not really on both sides of the line, as in a lot of positives and a lot of negatives, just a lot of kind of down the middle.
Well, so listen, we're giving a little peek behind the curtain. I obviously saw some of the comments from people coming in, and, you and I went into this being like, it was a good team win. It was a good defensive win. Saquon Barkley came alive. Like, there's times and a place for us to have the polarizing conversations about Daniel Jones. I didn't even think that it was going to be like, of the four things that we talked about, it was going to be tops of it. But clearly it's important to the fan base. There are still people that are divided. And look, we're not talking about the future. What I find interesting about the future is you have former Giant legends like Phil Simms and David Tyree that in the middle of the game are like, I've seen enough. Daniel Jones is the guy for the future. And then you have like a million people in the comments being like, what are you talking about? He has 95 yards passing so far this game. It becomes polarizing when you talk about the future. But I think what you and I wanted to talk about was, Daniel Jones's play just specifically against the Commanders. And the reason why he's so polarizing at him is because he threw for 65% completion percentage, which is good. It's fine. He threw for 160 yards and had no touchdowns, right? Not so great in a pass-happy, pass-friendly type of league right now. But the thing was, the eye test when you saw it was like he was zipping, but he had significant zip on the balls that he was throwing. And it looked like the coaches were asking him to do specific things during the game. He didn't throw a pass over 15 yards down the field. And the question's like, the question I had for you in this whole thing is, do you think the coaches were like, this is how we get the most out of Daniel Jones because of his limitations, or this is the best way that we win the game given the limitations of the rest of the offense, right? Like that's the hard thing that people can't compartmentalize.
I'll throw a little fodder into it. Passes look like they have a lot of zip on them when they're only going 7 to 10 yards, right? Like it's a pretty short distance to put zip on, and that's tongue in cheek. He was very effective in his play. No, I mean, listen, I think this is a great example of if ever there was a game you could say, this was maybe an example. Although you go back to early in the season, you understand what the game script has been, and I actually have a thought looking back at Saquon Barkley's game as well. But on Daniel Jones specifically, I think it's far more on what the coaching staff looks at as being the limitations of the offense versus what they think maybe Daniel Jones is capable of. And that's like, again, when we talk about him in recent weeks, I'm not saying that the coaching staff is saying he can't throw the ball downfield. That's why they're not scripting it that way. It's probably something like you said, 65% completion percentage. Well, based on personnel and what we think we could run here, if we ran 7 deep ball plays in a game, we might only be bullish that we're going to convert 2 of them. So in a game like this, where the defense gave you 7 points and you won by 8 and it was a bit of a dogfight, that actually matters a lot more. So that's not even just about Daniel Jones from a coaching perspective. It's about the team. Our team cannot afford to, quote, give up 2 or 3 plays offensively. And you'd say, well, what about when they throw 3 yards short on a third down play? Or what about when they don't convert a run for a first down? Yeah, like that exists. But the percentage chance you're going to get those plays is much higher than the risk of going downfield. We know Darius Slayton being a 50-50 kind of guy. I'm interested about Isaiah Hodgins because whether or not he has top-end speed, he doesn't. He does seem to be able to run the right routes and get open a little bit down the field. So, no, I mean, I put it majoritively on the offensive play calling, and I don't necessarily mean that negatively.
No, I think the offensive, Mike Kafka and Brian Daboll looked at it and said, I think this gives us our best chance to win based on limitations across the whole offense. To your point, I don't think it was specifically calling out Daniel Jones can't make the throw or he's not reading the right regression, whatever. Fine. What I think is fascinating is you look on the other side of the ball, you look on the other side of the field at the Washington Commanders, right? You have Taylor Heinicke, who threw for 250 yards on 3 less passes than what Daniel Jones did. But the key thing, Adam, is that Taylor Heinicke holds the ball too long while trying to get these balls to go downfield and get these players to run deeper routes. It's the reason why Kayvon Thibodeau ended up getting the sack and fumble and get it 7 points. It's the reason why Taylor Heinicke fumbled it in a key critical situation. Those 2 turnovers by Taylor Heinicke are the reason why they lost the game, not necessarily anything else. And so for me, the Giants are saying we don't want to put Jones in that situation to make those critical mistakes. And it's been the same all season long.
So I'll give you the 2 sides of the coin there for both quarterbacks. You're right in that Heinicke is looking to make those bigger plays. And guess what? If not for that one play, leave the fumble out of it. If not for this, the secondary one, the fumble, recovery, touchdown for the Giants. If not for that one play, this is a 13-12 game, right? 13-13 probably based on the way the game script goes, whatever. That they only need a field goal to win that game, right? So you're only this one moment away, and you could say, well, yeah, and that's Heinicke's fault, or it's the offensive line's fault, or it's just a great play from the defensive front, right? But that's the razor thin margin. And coming into this game the last couple of weeks for the Giants, I've consistently said, hey, remember when the defense was forcing some turnovers? And this is a universal truth for all NFL teams. Turnovers usually equal a better chance to win. But when the Giants stopped getting those turnovers, they went on the long losing streak. That is the razor thin margin of winning and losing these games. If not for that, even just that one play from Kayvon Thibodeau that gets the fumble and the recovery and the touchdown, the Giants may have lost that game. The Washington Commanders, in theory, I think, on a week-to-week basis, have far more wiggle room on, we can throw an interception, but we still have the weapons, et cetera, and we think we can get back into it. The other side that I'll just bring up quickly is that Daniel Jones. So, and again, you slice this how you want in the comments. If I can't be critical about Daniel Jones at all, then there's no point to have the conversation. I've been largely positive around what I've seen from him and what he's done. And there's always going to be this thing of like, if we had a number one wide receiver, what would it look like, right? How much better would the offense look? How much more open would it look? But I'll point out the one key play that was very frustrating if you're going to be critical of Jones. And that's the play when he tucks it and runs, and he's about 3 yards short. I think it's in the first half. It might even be on that long drive where they score the touchdown with Saquon Barkley to go up 14-3. He tucks it to run. He works through the line, and he's gained about 8 yards on first down. It's a 2nd and 2 scenario, and he can slide down and be ready to go and put themselves in a great position. If not for his elbow being down, he would have coughed up that fumble there in a moment where you don't need to be going for extra. It wasn't a critical 3rd and 7, and you're trying to get that extra couple of inches. And there was that moment. Again, he's done so much better on being decisive with the football in the pocket, making his reads and letting the ball go. He's been better progressively over the year running the ball and using his legs and being smart with it, throwing the ball away. I'm only putting all these positive things out there because I know the way this works. But in that moment, it's a really bad decision to not be sliding down and putting yourself in a spot where, guess what? If not for the replay and the elbow being down, that was a fumble, right? It's a bad play. You get lucky in getting it back the same way that Heineke, you can call it a bad play or a good play, and he gets unlucky that the replay shows the ball is out before his knee gets to the ground.
Yeah, and that was a key mistake for Daniel Jones, but it didn't cost them. You can see, as you mentioned, how razor thin the margins are with
Right, flip those two plays, though. Heineke holds on to the sack on Kayvon Thibodeau.
Getting flipped.
Right.
Well, and that's the thing is the Giants coaching staff knows that the best version of Daniel Jones is one that doesn't turn the ball over. And you are seeing that version because Daniel Jones, with a minimum of 100 attempts this season, so you've basically played in a handful of games, has the lowest interception percentage of any quarterback in the entire league. And you may say, well, yeah, it's hard to throw picks when you're throwing it 6 yards down the field. You're only having 6 yards per attempt. I agree. He also has the least amount of fumbles for any starting quarterback that has played in all of their games this season. So one of the big things that has plagued Daniel Jones has been those key critical turnovers. So when we talk about like, oh yeah, it's a matter of this one player or another, them constantly coaching up Jones to be able to say, don't turn the ball over no matter what. We'll live with not making the big play as long as we can. You know, Josh Allen said it, as long as it ends in some kind of kick somehow, some way, we'll live with it, whether it's a punt, a field goal, or an extra point. Just don't turn the ball over. We aren't talented enough on offense to overcome that.
And it's interesting, too, because you can supplement it by saying, because, you know, how many passes does Daniel Jones throw? Different games, depending. I mean, listen, he's 14th in the league in passing attempts right now. So, you know, honestly, if you told me that was closer to 20 than to 15, that's where I think you start to say, like, right, low interceptions, low fumbles. Well, guess what? If you're throwing it 15% less than other quarterbacks, that can make a big difference, too. And I mean, you know, again, we never expect him to be the Patrick Mahomes of the world, who has thrown 150 more passing attempts than Daniel Jones, 600 for Justin Herbert, by the way, 200 more passing attempts than Daniel Jones has thrown. And he's in a mix with some players, by the way, behind Matt Ryan, who was benched for a couple of games. And he's just ahead of like a Russell Wilson who's missed time, Kyler Murray's missed time, etc. But another one at 17 that I thought just worth noting is Tua Tagovailoa, who I think he's missed one. He's played 12 games to Daniel Jones 14. So this is actually a really good comp, right? Because Tua's kind of come back around. They gave him weapons, etc. But in 2 less games, Tua's only thrown 20 less pass attempts, right? So all these guys, he's right in that range with Jalen Hurts, though, who's been healthy all year, 286. So I think it paints the picture that you're talking about of, again, if you had one more piece of personnel inside of this team, if Kadarius Toney had just been a normal player for the Giants and didn't need to get traded, if Wan'Dale Robinson had just been healthy all year, you might see those marginal increases. And guess what? Maybe he'd have 2 more interceptions and 1 more fumble this year, but he might have 5 more total touchdowns, right? So all these things matter. And I just think, to your point, we didn't belabor it because it just felt like it was a team win on Sunday. But by and large, I really liked what I saw from Daniel Jones.
I mean,
whatever is being asked, right? Whatever that ask is from the coaching staff, I'd say Daniel Jones is probably achieving on 90% of it. I think there's a couple of little things that they little crisper here, little better decision making there, whatever it may be. But by and large, I think he's checking all those boxes. And I would anticipate that these last few games are going to kind of ramp that up a little bit when they may have to play some higher profile offenses.
Here's a simple answer. Daniel Jones had a 74 QBR. He had a 74, which if he had that as his average for the year, he'd be number 2 behind Patrick Mahomes. So like,
sure. Yeah.
But the crazy thing is, and the question that we always say is like, but he only threw for 160 yards. He didn't throw a touchdown pass. He only rushed for 35 yards. How can that be? And to your point, Adam, he is being asked to do things on the field, and he's doing them. And whatever he's being asked, he's doing pretty well. He's efficient when he runs the ball. He's making sure he doesn't turn the ball over, which is critical for a quarterback. The question is more like, if we saw more, or if they opened it up more, would that lead to more problems?
Yep.
And that's really the tough part of what we don't know. And it's why we get so many different polarizing comments of like, well, Jones is good. Is he that good? What's his limitations? It's the team. No, it's him. And then all of a sudden it goes into, will he be the starting quarterback next season? Which we will worry about later.
100%. One thing I'll note on Saquon Barkley, who we praised yesterday and had those, across 5 runs, but had 3 critical runs for over 30 yards at a clip. Remember, he was under 20 yards in the first half. Like, this was dangerously close to being another kind of game like that for him. And it's a good reminder too, almost in the same way as Daniel Jones, of like, yeah, when you punch through and you get it done, it feels great. But everything up until that moment, and by the way, it's kind of true about anything, right? Anything in sports, up until that moment, you go, it's just kind of another one of those crappy games. And I find it fascinating that it also comes in a game when you think like, hey, the offensive line started clicking there. And there's a little bit of a chicken or the egg kind of vibe in those moments where you go, so the offensive line just figured it out now? Like halfway through the third quarter, they just figured this out, where they're playing pretty solid pass protection all game long, but the running, which they've been better at all year, that's when it just clicked. And I think there's a little bit of that energy there for me too. Finishes with 87 yards, has the key critical plays. And again, this is not knocking the performance in that game. I think it's more saying like, hey, as we move forward here, we're going to talk defensively before we get to playoff scenarios. Like, you may need more from Daniel Jones and from Saquon Barkley over these last 3 games. And it keeps coming back to this, like, can you get there? Can they get to that? Because guess what? It may not always be 20-12 with a defensive touchdown that's giving you a victory when you need it late in the season.
Could not agree more. And the issue with all this, on the offensive side, is there's still a lot of question marks. We don't necessarily know how the offense is going to go. Remember, we only scored 13 points on the offensive side to get the win, but the defensive side of the ball gave us the extra touchdown that we needed. And what I think is most important, Adam, and we'll flip it over, is the reason why the defense was more effective was because some of the reinforcements that the Giants got for this game had some really, really big plays and completely changed some of the dynamics that we've seen on defense in the last few weeks.
Yeah, I'll focus in on Landon Collins to start here, because we kind of been looking around the room saying what happened to the guy that you brought back and was maybe going to be helpful in these scenarios. Remember, Tate Crowder gets deactivated from the active 53 in this particular game. And it's really because, as you see the role that Landon Collins has, it's to make room for him on that active roster. And then I'm just going to pull out it was one play. It's in the first half. It's a running play. And he comes sweeping around the edge, cleans the play up on the backside of a run play, brings the man down. There's other moments that he had in this game, but that was so indicative to me, again, in a running game where they're getting gashed. And there was also plays in passing situations that obviously Landon Collins' speed, being in a pseudo linebacker role, is going to help him. Like, we say speed relative to linebackers versus if he was playing safety. But I thought there were these key moments where his speed, his quickness, and frankly, probably his football IQ really benefited the Giants in a handful of plays defensively. It's hard to look at it and say, there's the answer to help stymie the run. I actually think Washington did the Giants favors in a lot of ways, getting away from the run in the second half of this game. They were getting gashed, still gave up 160, but you can kind of see where a defense that is really playing stout, bend but don't break, and and kind of find these key moments. And on Sunday, they had 5 or 6 key moments defensively. That's what they're kind of playing for. And Collins really gives you a higher opportunity to have that success than if you had to take Crowder or Jabroni Pumpleduck in there.
Well, I think you summed it up pretty great towards the end there, Adam. The linebacking position, it just shows how devoid of starting talent we actually have. That Landon Collins,
consistency.
Who's like a pseudo safety hybrid, come up in the box, stop the run guy, looked like our best linebacking option. And he looks like the best one moving forward because he does bring a different element. You've seen Tay Crowder. You've seen Micah McFadden. You've seen a whole host. I think we saw a little too much of Jalen Smith against the Commanders, which wasn't great. And so what we're sitting here saying is Landon Collins might be our best option in the middle at the linebacking position because we are so ineffective at stopping the run. His physicality and like downhill running and the thump that he gives provides that defense a little bit of, I don't know, swagger, a little bit more like intensity when it comes to it. It felt like against the Eagles, there was no resistance to anything. And we know that they are a very good run team. But at least against the Commanders, you felt like he had that big third and 2 play where he came up and made sure to make the tackle, forced a punt. We haven't really seen that over the last few weeks. Kudos to Landon Collins. He's going to be signed to the active roster. And I have a feeling you're going to see him play a key role down the stretch in the next 3 games.
Yeah, that was the key third down play where it was just wrap. All it was wrap it up, right? It was wrap the player up, and you got and the secondary player on that. I may be mistaken, but it may actually be Toney Jefferson, who we're going to talk about here as well. It may have been a cornerback though, and because I vividly remember saying, well, there you go. Just like you drew it up when you need a key run stop play. It's not the defensive lineman. It's not a linebacker. I mean, Collins is whatever. It's like 2 of your smallest players are the guys that are coming up making those hits. And that's effort, that's energy, that's focus, and being in the right spot, filling in those gaps. And Toney Jefferson is filling in a gap here for the New York Football Giants, a guy who to this point, including Sunday, has only appeared in 5 games for this team. Do you view Toney Jefferson's performance, one of the highest rated players along with Daniel Jones coming out of that game for the Giants? Do you view him do you think this is like the expansion of his role, or do you continue to look at him as if the spot is right? Because that seems to be the way it's been all year for him. If the moment is right, we'll try to utilize you, but there certainly is probably a level of getting overexposed like with so many of the guys in the secondary.
Yeah, listen, I think that Toney Jefferson played well. Another guy that showcased his physicality on the field. He had one hit where he just absolutely laid the guy out, kind of stood up and showed his muscles off. And you're like, that's what he brings to the table. I don't think he's going to be a guy that plays 97% of the snaps on the defensive side of the ball, and you feel like he's plugging holes. But situationally, in the right circumstance, he is a rotational piece that Wink Martindale can use. And a lot of that right now has to do with how depleted the linebacking position, the secondary is at the moment. I think he still has a role on this team, even when we get some of these reinforcements that we'll talk about. But I don't necessarily think this is like the coming out party, the renaissance of either Landon Collins and Toney Jefferson. I think as long as they can fill a void and a role, and they're better than the guys that we have on the practice squad, I think that's really all we're asking them to do.
No, 100%. Before we get into the playoff scenario, what are the couple of names of guys that can be coming back into the fold here for Big Blue over these last 3 weeks?
Yeah, so there's 2 big names that come to mind on the defensive side of the ball. One is Adoree Jackson. His injury was just about 4 weeks ago. They said anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks. He was doing some like jogging on the field during practice last week. It looks like it's encouraging. All signs are saying that in the next week or 2, he's probably going to be out there. And man, do we need that boost. We need a cornerback that has the ability to play coverage. We need a starting cornerback. That's a good. I'm like, I was about to say we needed a cornerback that's like a number 1 that could shut down. And you're like, we need a starting cornerback. Just starter. But that's what Adoree Jackson will be for the Giants.
Yeah.
And he's going to be a huge boost to this defense, knowing that it'll at least help bolster how long the defensive line will have to get pressure on the quarterback.
It dramatically changes it for Wink Martindale, just knowing, because if he knows, hey, the number 1, you go take care of him. Now all my pieces, I try to manufacture success against some of these other players on the field, right? You don't have to look too far to think about the big play to Dotson or getting down the sidelines on a couple of these passes for Heineke, where you go, listen, that matchup may still be there, but it might be a Dory Jackson in a key moment, or it might be our second best option as opposed to our third or our fourth. Like the trickle down effect is so critical for him coming back.
And when you talk about third or fourth best option, like you think about what Julian Love has next to him in the safety position right
Yeah.
now. Dane Belton has kind of been buried on the depth chart. It looks like it's more Jason Pinnock has been out there. You saw and you heard Tony Jefferson's name be batted around quite a bit for being out there. But the Giants are expecting Xavier McKinney back at some point. They have been very coy with what this hand injury is.
I don't think it's going to be this next week, but
yeah, it feels like he might. I feel like I'm more confident that Adoree Jackson will be back sooner than I am Xavier McKinney. From what I hear though, Xavier McKinney is trying his best to ask to play with one of those clubs on his hand, where it just completely covers it all, which is kind of strange for a guy that likes to make interceptions from the secondary. But here's a question for you.
Is a one-armed Xavier McKinney better than a Toney Jefferson or a Pinnock or a Landon Collins, whatever it costs you? 1,000%, right? 1,000% it is. And hopefully the beauty of that is that because it's a hand injury, he can still be ramped up physically. It's just a matter of being capable of getting out there on the field and playing. So when he steps out there, it can just be a full go scenario here. Honestly, at this point, and that's what we'll close out the show with here, these playoff clinching scenarios for the Giants, if they can find a way to clinch even ahead of, just have a wild card spot, I think at that point you might say, listen, Xavier McKinney, when do we need you? We need you in the wild card round of the playoffs, right? As if it means 100% health versus 80% health. And they did the same thing with Adoree this past weekend. He could have played in theory there for a handful of snaps, and they risked a significant scenario of losing that game. They snuck that win out, and now hopefully they have him fully healthy as we look at this NFC playoff picture, Andrew, where we have three scenarios this weekend for the Giants to clinch a playoff berth. Now, just to be clear, the number one tenet of that process is the Giants beating the Minnesota Vikings.
Yes, the Giants open up as 4.5-point underdogs to the Minnesota Vikings, which is interesting because they were 4.5-point underdogs to the Washington Commanders. They kind of have the Commanders and the Vikings and the Giants at the same skill level or the same level right now. I mean, it's surprising to me that the line was as low as it is, but it's kind of the respect that the Giants are getting after a big win against the Commanders. But the Giants need to take care of business against the Minnesota Vikings in order to have a chance to wrap up things. Before I get into the other scenarios, can you believe if I told you in the preseason that in week 16, the Giants could either, if I told you what was more likely, the Giants would be mathematically eliminated from playoff contention or the Giants can clinch a playoff berth? Which would you have thought was more feasible going into this?
Oh, of course. I mean, listen, it's like even coming into this past weekend, right? When you're 7-5-1, if you told me the team was 7-5-1 at this point of the season, where were they in the playoff picture? You'd be more likely to say hanging on by a thread or on the outside looking in, right? As opposed to being a team that found itself in the 6-7 seed and very much, if you're capable of getting an extra win, of being into this playoff picture. So no, I mean, again, it's a good reminder that like, hey, the Giants are a team that had expectations. So I think, again, go back to the tape. I think we sat around that 6-7 win, maybe push for the 8th win on the season. I think we put that on the table for this team, but the way in which they've gone about this season has certainly completely flipped it on its head from what you would have said. Listen, we all know they were 6-1 at one point. However,
right. And so the New York Giants needing to win against the Minnesota Vikings is the first part of the equation. I won't go through all three of the scenarios because I think there's an easy way to sum it up. The Giants there's basically four teams that are vying for, four teams that are vying for three different.
I'll make it even simpler. Any combination of two teams need to lose combined with the Giants win, right? And I know why you said it that way, because it was like you look at it and it's okay, the Seattle.
Put the Giants in the bucket with them, but it's easier. Right. If the Giants win, there are three other teams that they're fighting for a playoff spot against. Right. If two of them lose, then the Giants end up clinching the playoffs. Exactly. And Adam, let me just explain the scenarios to you. Seattle Seahawks are playing at Kansas City. I don't know.
And it's a game that matters for Kansas City. That's important.
Yes.
So you
Kansas
feel good about
City is still looking to wrap up the 1 seed in the AFC. Seattle has to go to at Arrowhead. As a Giants fan, you got to feel pretty good about that scenario happening there. Washington has to go to the San Francisco 49ers, who are looking to get and lock in that second seed over the Minnesota Vikings. That feels pretty realistic to expect a loss. And then the last game is Detroit goes to Carolina, which feels like Detroit has probably a decent chance to win that game, knowing the limitations that Carolina has.
Yep.
But Adam, there is a very good scenario that if the Giants find a way to win against Minnesota, that out of three of those games end up in losses in the Giants' favor.
Yeah, right now today, if you ask me with the way Detroit's been playing, I'd probably say maybe the most likely, with the Giants already having beaten Washington this weekend, you'd probably say it's pretty likely that it can end up being the scenario of Detroit and the Giants making it into the playoffs here behind the Dallas Cowboys as the number one wild card seed. Now, that's very easy to say that when all these scenarios involve the Giants automatically winning. We got a couple more days here. So before we get out the door, house cleaning. Obviously, the holidays are coming up. Maybe we'll have a Friday show out there for you. Maybe not. We just want to be able to enjoy ourselves, obviously, when that comes around. I think it should be a full boat, though. And we're going to turn our attention to Minnesota, a very different scenario, a very different team. They will be exposable defensively. They are not a good defense. So will they open things up for Daniel Jones a bit more? Can they manufacture that success? Or is it the tried and true method of consistent Saquon Barkley, mitigating turnover opportunities, and finding your way to get a key win late in the season? If they do that, an opportunity maybe then to rest some players down the stretch and prepare for a wild card game against the San Francisco 49ers. Who knows? We'll wait and see. Maybe even a division rivalry matchup there in the playoffs at some point along the way. Until then, though, I'll tell you what you do, Andy. You get over to YouTube. You don't have to do this. You're already doing it. But everybody else should. Subscribe to the channel. Obviously, help us get to that 2,000 subscriber mark. We really appreciate it. Get into the comments. How are you feeling about these scenarios? And do you ultimately care what anybody else does? Do you just want that sweet victory against Minnesota this weekend? You get over to the podcast feed, wherever you get those needs fulfilled. Until next time, as Andrew Makowitz and myself, quite frankly, would want, need, and nay, demand the people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.